Brews Light, episode number 54, not to be confused with our full podcast, which I believe we're about to film episode number 79 on that one. So we have a lot of great authors for you to choose from. Today we are welcoming Nicholas Tana, although I like the story you just told me about the pronunciation of your last name, if you want to tell my audience that.
Yeah, the name is Italian. It's kind of a unique name in Italian. I think it means burrow. And Tana is how it's pronounced in Italian. So they'll have like Tana di Vino, like a burrow where they store wine. And but I'm okay with Tana because it sort of got Americanized with time and people called us that. And back when I grew up, that was, you wanted to belong in a way in our culture. And a lot of times we tried to adapt to the culture we were living in. And that was one of the ways in which our grandparents kind of did that.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point, that, for instance, my family is German and Czech, and I'd say we very much assimilated, but there is also Oktoberfest all over the country. The Irish, my kids are half Irish, and their dad is from Dublin, and they're very big into Irish culture. Well, some of them are, not all of them. And this is huge to them. They love St. Patrick's Day. They love their Irish Wolfhound. They like to go to Ireland and visit the castles and their relatives, but they're also completely American. So it's just interesting how some people maybe assimilate more than others. Some people, and I think in the days when your family came, it was very much the Italian enclaves and the Irish enclaves, maybe not so much now.
Very much so. In fact, the Irish came over before most of the Italians, and my family immigrated in through New York. And at that time, a lot of the Irish immigrants came through New York sooner. They had the potato famine, right? So they rushed out. They wanted to find where there were streets paved of gold, right?
Yes.
So they came out towards New York. And a lot of them, to assimilate, they had a hard time. I think the Germans came first. And it's weird how every immigrant goes through a really difficult time assimilating. They go through this very difficult journey. But yet when they arrive, it's like they're bitter for that experience. And then when a new immigrant comes in, instead of necessarily saying, hey, let me help you out, I feel compassion for what we went through, they take out all that angst and anger and bitterness and do the same thing to the previous immigrant group. And that was historically what happened. And I remember the Irish kind of acclimated by becoming cops and getting very involved in the police force. And that gave them a semblance, a sense of community, but also power. And the Italians had to deal with a lot of the Irish cops that were very tough on them. And how they dealt with it was, well, they brought the old culture over and they were very much involved in the underworld. And they brought in this Italian mafia underworld, which helped to protect the families and the immigrants that were coming in and became their police, so to speak. So.
I read an interesting story not terribly long ago in the last month, I'd say, and I wish I could remember where. I'm positive it was a place in Italy that I think they lost their job. Something happened that a lot of the jobs in industry went away. So first wave of immigrants came from this particular town to America, and then a second wave came. And what's interesting about this is that when they studied the health, they noticed the people in this particular town that was 99% settled from this town in Italy, they were incredibly healthy. They lived to a long age. They didn't have anxiety or depression. They didn't have heart disease. And they did a lot of analysis of what is different here. Is the water cleaner? Is the air cleaner? Are they eating better? And basically what they found out was they brought community with them. And so because they all knew each other from this town, they kept this idea of this small town and community. And so they had a lot of support. They had a lot of things they did together. And it was all about community and feeling that they had the support of the whole town. That made them healthier. So I thought that was a very interesting story. And I wish I could remember what town in Italy, but I can't.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a few towns that are like that in Italy, so it'll make it a little challenging. But on the note of community, that's a nice segue.
Go ahead.
Well, if we're going to talk about the blog and the book.
Right.
Yeah, where I talk about the need for finding our tribe in our community today. the need to find that tribe to survive what is becoming a very dehumanized, systemized world that we live in. And I feel like that's super important for everyone.
Well, give some introduction. The book doesn't quite exist yet. I didn't realize that when I booked you.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Well, if you're talking about
under
the
the
corporate
layer.
zombie survival guide, that
Yeah,
book does exist actually. It's just not available for the public at this moment in time
okay.
as a book. The book was I've written it and it's being reviewed by some publishers right now, one in particular. And I don't want to jinx anything, but they're a pretty good publisher, and I think they'd be a great fit for it. Hopefully it works out.
Mhm.
But in the meantime, it is done and finished. And worst case, it's at a point where I can self-publish it if I want. And that's not even worst case these days. That's a great way to take control of a
It
property.
really is.
It
Mhm.
really is. It's underestimated, and the stigma around it should really be thrown out the window in some ways at this point.
I think
So
it has gone out the window a lot. I started in 2009. I published my first book, and I went self-publishing for a number of reasons. One was just the length of time it takes to traditionally publish. Another was that somebody really talked me into this. They're going to have you do most of the marketing, and they're going to take most of the royalties.
yeah,
And the
true.
third was I felt that my novels were too secular for Christian fiction and talked too much about faith for traditional secular fiction. I just assumed I'm not going to find someone who wants this balance of both ideas. So it's a lot less now, though. I think, in fact, it's fairly well accepted.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. It sounds interesting what you did. I think if you're truly creative today, it's impossible to be published by a publisher. I think if you're pushing the envelope in any way, you probably are going to be forced to self-publish. That being said, the stigma comes around a reality. It's easier to self-publish. So you have people that maybe aren't pushing the envelope, that maybe aren't even writing something worthy of reading, that will be
Yeah.
able to get that book out there and gluttony the whole system. So knowing this, it's really hard to discern the difference when you don't know the reader or the person, or you're taking a chance on something with
Mhm.
precious lifetime. And so I understand where the negative comes from. The negative from self-publishing comes from you're in there with anyone can do it. So therefore, it's less of a chance that someone's going to respect or know for sure that you've got a diamond amongst the rough, right? So,
Right.
but that being said, the time in which you can execute and get something out, there's no doubt publishers are backlogged. Your best bet would be 6 months if they really think that it's timely now and they have to push it past everyone else. Usually it's 2 years out at least. And that's because they do a 6-month campaign for marketing anyway, which to your point is mostly driven by you as the writer at this point. They'll put a nominal cap on how much they actually pay. They get discounts on all of that, which they don't pass on to you. And it's another way in which they save money. It's very similar to the film distribution market as well, which I've also had several movies distributed through distributors. I've never self-distributed my movies. And there's goods and bads with all of it. But having the community and having a publisher that has their own social media and their own people that's not a part of your group out there kind of on bat with you is still an advantage to an author too. So it's a give or take.
It is. So tell my audience about your book. And I think you have several. So
I do.
Which one do you have a reading from today?
Well, I mean, the one I was intending to talk about is Corporate Zombie Survival, and that's what segues into the tribe. That one is available currently as a series of articles and a blog. So if people go to corporatezombisurvival.com, they can read a lot of it. They can also sign up for a free newsletter, which will tell you when the book is available. The book, to be honest, so I wrote an original book that was probably 500 plus pages. And when I, it was all applying the metaphor of surviving a zombie apocalypse, succeeding in business today. But it was very Kafka-esque in the way I was taking a serious approach using maybe a not so serious metaphor to go into the problems with our culture today and how it's impacted how we do business. And this also encompasses creatives and artists and people that don't see themselves as corporate, because we're using technology right now to even do this podcast. So it's impossible. You have a service provider providing your internet. It's impossible to do anything today as an entrepreneur or as a creative and not leverage a corporation or their product or service. So everyone is super, I don't want to say the word subservient, but at risk of the powers of the corporate zombie takeover of our culture. And so I had this huge book, but again, the challenges I had with publishing that was like, this is almost more of a, you have this tongue-in-cheek sardonic approach, but you have a legit book that the people that are going to stomach this approach are not going to read 500 pages. And so you're kind of stuck in the middle somewhere. So I kind of took that advice and parsed it down to an illustrated guide, which has the key core principles of the big book. And then I'm using the extra features and articles and all that stuff that's not going to necessarily appear in that book as a blog. And so that serves twofold. That's building an audience already before the book is released. It's testing, kind of like Mark Twain did with his serialized versions of stories before he published them it was published as a full book. And he was able to kind of relate to the audience and get feedback from the audience as to what he was doing. And I'm doing the same thing with my articles before the book actually sees print.
I was impressed that you mentioned in the first week the blog was out, you got 1,300 subscribers.
Yeah, 1,300 plus subscribers, a little over.
Oh, how? How did they find your blog that quickly?
Well, I also hit up a lot of folks that were subscribed to other things. And, because I have several movies out. I have 2 movies that currently on Amazon and on Tubi. And I have an audience for my other projects, right? And then I've also have another comic that's out. So I've done tours, book tours. I'm a regular guest at Comic-Con in San Diego. I do signings there. So I've spoken at libraries. So I'm continually building my author platform. I've been hired by Disney to write books. So I'm a Disney published author as well.
Okay.
So I've been doing this for quite a while. I don't want to mislead people into thinking that's easy to do this, get a bunch of subscribers. I've been working at this for decades. So it's a slow burn. It's a building an audience and people that respect what you have to say over time.
Right. But you have a long background in that. So what would be one thing that readers might find about surviving the corporate world in relating it to a zombie apocalypse? What would be a piece of advice you give?
Well, I think a really big one right now is AI, and how AI there's this overvaluing of intelligence, I think, in our culture, intel or information, right? And undervaluing of what I would say is wisdom, which only humans can have wisdom, because I believe wisdom is partly predicated on emotion and consciousness. And so and also on another factor, which a lot of people are scared of, suffering. And so without those qualities, I don't think we learn to use intelligence in a wise way. And I don't think it becomes wisdom. And so human beings now, in their overvaluing of intelligence, it's funny, you hear the term artificial intelligence, but you would never hear the term artificial wisdom, because the very nature makes you laugh. It sounds like an oxymoron. It's like, it just doesn't make sense, right? We have a profound respect for wisdom, because it also comes with emotional weight, because it comes with a recognition of the suffering of the human condition. And AI can never know that. So it is much more calculative, So and zombies are not aware of that. They're not conscious. They don't have those emotions like that. They don't feel pain and suffer quite the same way as we do.
So are you a fan of AI, a hater of AI? This comes up with almost every author lately that I talk to, and some absolutely hate it, some love it. I'm not sure I've heard anyone just in between.
Well, you're going to hear that today, because I feel like our culture, and this is another thing that ties in with the Corporate Zombie blog. I have an article that's currently out they can read. It talks about the binary thinking, or I call it Romero black and white thinking, like a zombie movie, right? Zombies tend to think in binary terms, and it's a simplified way of understanding our world. And I understand why, because it's part of how we educate. It's part of, like, for us to understand up front, we have to know what back is, or at least perceive of it, right?
Mhm.
For, you know, to know how it means to go outside, you have to know what an inside or perceive of it. So a lot of how we educate ourselves, how we learn, is based on a cognitive development that creates these either dualities or opposites or opposing concepts. And so we tend to overdo that, though, in order to simplify things we don't understand when the universe is much more complex. And I call that binary thinking. And what happens when we do binary thinking, it's really maybe effective if you're like in a gunfight and you have to make a decision whether you're going to shoot or not. And there's people slunging guns and shooting, right?
Mhm.
We can revert to that. You might have to cut back some of the complexity and think quicker. But we can't treat our lives like a gunfight. We can't treat our lives like that constantly every day. We have to think more profoundly, because what happens in a gunfight, oftentimes the fastest draw shoots themselves in the foot, right? And that's actually a saying. And so binary thinking is a limited way of thinking, and it's effective in very small bits, but we have to know that it's convenient but not real. And so to think, okay, is AI all good or is AI all bad? That's a binary approach.
Mhm.
AI is not any more all good or all bad than a car, right? Like
Right.
we can hit people with a car and now it's bad, but we can take someone to the hospital with a car and save their life. Is it good
Right.
now? So like I really think it is what it is, and how we tend to use it. If we can use it wisely, well, that's one thing. Yeah.
That's exactly how I see it, which is maybe, so I guess I am in the middle, which is maybe why I find it interesting that most authors seem to be one or the other, but I'm the same way. I see it as a tool. And so, for instance, my husband and I have a lot of fun on Suno, which is AI music. And now my degree is in music. I can go write music if I want to. I can write, a symphony if I want to. I do have that knowledge and skill. But the fact is, my days are very busy. And so sometimes we come up with this, just silly things like I did one called Life is Kind of Funny, and it's all about our new life on a farm when we both grew up very suburban. And I had a blast with it. It was so much fun, and it came up with this catchy tune. And I know some people are going to go, oh, that's cheating. And it's like, why? I had fun with it. It's just having fun. And I get if you're like, for instance, my husband is an adjunct professor, among other things he does. And he does have to run his students' papers through to see if they're likely AI, because in that case, they're not really coming up with ideas or learning the skill of writing for themselves. So yes, there is that, the pros and cons.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think you're right. And you said have fun with it, and that's great. That's a form of entertainment. But there's a
Mhm.
difference when, and when you've suffered through something, right? You've suffered through a composition that's
Mhm.
taken you a long time, and all of a sudden you figured it
Yes.
out. And that
Yes.
high you get from having accomplished something that was challenging is a lot higher than when something came easy. If we
Yes.
liked things that came easily, we wouldn't be so in love with movies that show conflict.
Right.
Like,
Right.
we intrinsically like a challenge, right? We wouldn't probably continue living in this world if we didn't like that. So, and when when everything's going peaches and cream, we create our own drama, right? Because there's something that we get a satisfaction
Yes.
from having suffered through and challenging things. But at the same time, we're also averse to pain and suffering on another level. And we sometimes really just want love and adoration, and we don't want to work for it that hard.
Right.
So I think it really just comes out to, what is your intent? You'll only be cheating yourself when it comes down to what you really feel. If you just want people to like you or follow you or be impressed with it, well, that's a different kind of appeal. But if you want to know in your heart that something was meaningful to you because you took a really long path to get there, and you surmounted that challenge and you
Right.
grew from it, that's a different level of learning and
You know,
appreciation.
and that's something that I've noticed. Okay, I can go to Copilot and it's amazing how good some of the lyrics are that it will spit out.
Mhm.
But there are certain subjects, like if I'm going to write a poem on faith, I am never going to have AI do that. And that goes back, I think, to the wisdom you were talking about. You can't get wisdom. You might get some really good poetry even. But is it really a human felt emotion and human felt wisdom? Is it really connecting with your subject if you use AI? So definitely, you're right. There's a time to use it and there's a time not to use it. And if you use it all the time, you lose the skill to use or to not use it when you shouldn't. So I think that's a very good point. So do you have an excerpt ready to read?
So we talked a little bit about finding your tribe, right? So I can kind of give you an idea of that, right? There's an article on. So in the demanding world of professional competition, isolation spells disaster. Just as a survivor in a zombie apocalypse needs a reliable team, your professional network is a crucial lifeline, a trusted network. Your tribe is the key to survival. The drive to form a collective isn't just strategy, it's instinct. We survive not alone, but through the strength of a cohesive group. Modern professional life often pressures us towards self-reliance and competition, but real resilience comes from cooperation. Much like a lone survivor in a zombie movie must eventually link up with a group to make it through the night, the same principles apply to the modern workplace.
Very nice. I would like to ask people to like, share, subscribe, help us grow so I can keep bringing you more authors, and check out our sponsor, Gabriel's Horn Press, where we have many more great authors. So in addition to this, you were talking about your film writing. You wrote Hell's Kitty. Is that a movie or a book?
It's both. That was a comic book, but it's also a movie currently on Tubi and I think on Amazon as well.
Okay, and you've written children's fiction and for the horror zine. I mean, these are like wildly opposite.
Yes and no. I mean, if
Yes
you
and no?
think about it, Clive Barker's written children's books and horror novels. I feel like we often like to siphon off what is our childlike lives and what children should be enjoy or appreciate with what our adult lives are and what adults should appreciate and enjoy.
Mhm.
But I think really some of the most golden moments of our experience in growing up and shaping our imagination are when we were a child. And to divorce our connection to that and our love of that as an adult doesn't make sense to me. I feel like if we kept that more, in fact, we'd probably be kinder adults and more creative in a lot of ways. So I feel like I run the gamut with children's stories because I feel like children are more open to all kinds of creative possibilities. But then I also, there are certain things where I can dive into some of the more extreme horrors or scary side of things that maybe aren't quite ready for kids, but I can still have that and express myself as an adult too.
So I'm curious, would you write, say, a scary story for children? And just to give some background on this, couple things in the past. The second author well, actually, he wasn't an author. He was from Russia, and he was talking about fairy tales and Russian fairy tales for children and how in Russia they have very dark endings. And he said, we do that so they can learn, whereas now today, children's books tend to be all just happy and, friendly and nice. And I think we were talking earlier about the lack of conflict and how we turned conflict. And I know my own grandchildren, I had sent them a book. I did this for my Reading with Sheep series where I read a book to sheep and put it on YouTube. And then I send the book to my grandchildren. And this particular book was called The Wicked Kings of Bloom. Have you heard of it by any chance?
I think I have heard of it, but I'm not. Yeah.
Stephen Kellogg, I think, is the author. It's a fantastic book, but it concerns these two brothers who bitterly hate each other, and they each go take over one of the towns of Bloom. And then one day they're looking through their spyglass and they see each other in their opposite castles. And so they go to war and they always scream, Eog. So, sometimes I think everybody should just go out on their deck and scream Eog at the neighbors, just because, And so they go into this land, I forget what it's called, this valley, and into this cave, and they each get one of these big monsters to be their armored kind of personal horse. But it's a monster. Now, because my grandchildren have grown up in a different age than I did, this book actually scared them. And I was, I really thought that says a lot about how children's literature has changed. And so I'm curious where you are on that and what your books for children are like.
Yeah, well, I've actually written a story where the character gets devoured at the end by a butterfly and then
Oh,
sees through
really?
the eyes of the butterfly. And
Hmm.
and this is a very small character who doesn't get an opportunity to see much, but
Hmm.
then sees the world by being absorbed into this butterfly. And in some ways, it's a very Buddhistish principle, but it's also could come across as very violent and maybe not for kids. And I got that feedback from an editor who said, Nicholas, I love this story. It's beautifully written. I feel like in every way it's for a kid except the ending. But I feel like you should publish some of your stories as children's stories for adults.
Hmm.
And I was like, well, that's really interesting. Because originally what I fell in love with as a child, reading and being told children's stories, they were a lot more grim. In fact, they were Grimm's fairy tales. And that's a
Yep.
very German storytelling. And the point of those were to scare children. They were like little morality tales to scare children into behaving. You don't
Right.
talk to that stranger, weird person under the bridge,
Yep.
or they may eat you. You don't go walking, off the path, on your way to go, into strange people's homes or areas
Hmm.
because you may get eaten or disappear, right? And
Right.
and that's a real practical way of using fear to scare kids into doing things to protect them per
Hmm.
se, right? And so whether it's healthy or not from a modern psychology standpoint, well, that's a whole nother thing. But I can say that, oh, sorry about that. Let me decline this. I can say that it definitely worked to, those moral tales definitely work to instill a sense of morality or fear or whatever
Right.
in kids and left a mark, right? And so now we want to pull that away or separate that when the very notion of storytelling and children's fairy tales were all about that, and even impacted our horror stories to this day, to the point where it's mocked in like Scream and Scary, or I think it's Scream or Scary Movie. I'm mixing the two up right now, but the Wes Craven series where they kind of talk about the plots of horror stories and how as soon as you
Yeah.
lose your virginity, you're going to get killed, right? Like
Right.
that's the
Right.
adult version of those moral tales that were told to us as children in Grimm's fairy
Hmm.
tales.
Now, is that this series, Scary Movie 1, 2, 3, and 4?
Yes, I think
Okay.
that's
Yeah.
what it might have been. Yeah, yeah.
Those
Again, I mixed that up. Honestly, I mixed up Scream and Scary Movie. So, which both had a series of. I think it was actually Scream. It was Wes Craven's Scream franchise, which I'm talking about, where they kind of play with the whole idea of categories and
Okay.
yeah,
And tropes and right.
yeah.
So what would your horror tend to be like? So I never read much horror, but I've published a few, Sean Brinks in particular, and also I can't believe his name has slipped my mind. And they're very different. Sean's it's Christian horror, so it's kind of dealing with demonic things, and it is kind of truly horrifying, but again, it's a bit of a morality tale. And then his name's going to come to me as soon as we finish this. Anyway, his is very different. For instance, one of his books is set in Antarctica, and it's scientists, and this blob thing comes and starts, they start finding all the scientists dead. But there's a twist on it at the end that this thing really can't help itself. It's just doing what it knows how to do. And I found out, you know what? Given the right horror, I I like it. Um, but it depends. And so is your horror more psychological, thriller, more Stephen King, demons, ghosts? What is yours like?
I think it has a little bit of all of that.
Hmm.
Like Hell's Kitty is a classic example of something that is a comedy horror, but can be scary at times. I've had friends that don't like horror movies; they get scared. That said, that was way too scary for them. It was dramatic and there's some great makeup, but there's comedic parts. But then there's this sort of thriller side to it too. Like there's scenes in which you're not too sure. Like there's this, the whole motif is a detective kind of uncovering who's doing these killings, and then if it is the cat, who's possessing the cat, and so this whole thing kind of doesn't unravel till the very end where you find out who's behind the everything. And so there's that aspect to it too. But then I also like the very meta. I like to play with tropes. So in that story, I have a lot of famous iconic horror actors in movies that are well known, especially from the 80s of horror, playing parodies of the roles they're famous for, in a unique story about a horror writer who can't find love because his cat is possessed of him and rumored to be possessed. So is there a ghost story? Yeah, well, absolutely. Is there a thriller? There's definitely a detective thriller kind of component. Is there slasher elements? Yes, because I'm deliberately taking everything that is horror, has become horror, and playing with those those tropes, right, in the story.
So yours wouldn't be more the horror like, say, Piranha, where it's just horrible stuff happening to people.
Well, definitely when the cat is attacking.
Okay.
It's sort of like but it's more like the rabbit in like Monty Python's Search for Holy Grail,
So I have to tell you something. Speaking of the rabbit from Monty Python, among other things we do on our farm here, we raise meat rabbits. And typically New Zealand whites are the most popular meat rabbits. So they're pure white, like the rabbit in Monty Python. And one day we had one of them turn very aggressive. To this day, I don't know why. She's now in the freezer because she would literally and she would growl at me. I don't think most people have ever heard a rabbit growl. I didn't know they could, but she would literally leap and growl. And I went, oh my gosh, now I know where the rabbit from Monty Python came from.
Well, maybe if she growled a little harder, she wouldn't be in the freezer.
Well, she didn't go down without a fight. Let's just put it that way. But it got to the point where, because it was winter and her cage was full of hay and straw so she could be warm, now she poops on top of the hay and it's getting higher and deeper. I couldn't get my hand in there to clean it because she would tear my hand apart. In fact, you can't see it here, but in the light you can see a scratch from here up to here from a rabbit, and that's from a year ago, and that's never going away, it doesn't look like. So yeah, they're a 15th of my size, but they can do you some real damage if they're scared. So anyway, I wanted to get into, how many movies do you have out?
So I have several movies out right now that are both available for stream, but they're very different worlds. So if you can't tell already, I like to play in different genres and I like to do different things. But one is the horror movie Hell's Kitty, which is based on the book. And the other one is a documentary called Sticky, a Self-Love Story. And that one is about the world's most popular taboo. So I'll let you investigate that one to see what that is. But suffice it to say that it has been redistributed and put out there many times over. It's screened at many colleges. Harvard bought the rights to it, and it's about our love-hate that we have with our own sexuality, so to speak.
And which one is this?
This is called Sticky, a Self-Love Story.
Okay. I am really curious. It seems to me that filmmaking is something a lot of people do, but to really get it distributed and so on, and to actually make the film, how do you break into something like that?
Well, how I did it was, and things are changing all the time now. The first time I got my movie distributed, the first movie was released in 2016. So that's already been almost a decade now, right?
Yeah.
But I can say that it was interesting. I met the distributor of that film, Vision Films, at the Cannes Film Market. And so it took me flying all the way to Cannes, France, to meet the distributor who wound up getting it distributed through Amazon and all these different platforms, and still distributes it today. We renewed our license because they've had such a success with distribution. And it also has a foreign distributor as well that's been doing all the foreign sales. And that is that's how I did it. But it's interesting that I live in Los Angeles where there's plenty of distributors, and I had to go to Cannes to meet the one who was actually based in Los Angeles as well. So I think there's something to, making the effort to fly out and be in a very exclusive area where people take you seriously. They're like, okay, well, whatever they got to show, they're here, right? There I can.
Right.
So I don't know, in theory, you should be able to just email any distributor and see their catalog and be like, this is my project, send them the film. And if they like it, they'll get back to you. But the reality of that is they're probably swamped with lots of applications, and I don't know how much they rifle through that. That's a classic example where AI may perhaps help weed through all of that stuff, but how good it's going to be at actually finding the gems amongst buzzwords and whatever kind of fit, I don't know. But these days, I don't even know how good people are at that. So,
well, from everything I've heard, they're dealing with slush piles, of hundreds of manuscripts, and for film distribution, probably the same thing. Did you make the film yourself? Did you have someone else do it, or how was that process?
I made both films myself, but there was money raised for the first film. The second film, I was able to do it myself, and I did it very cheaply. It's a super low budget, but I did it over a lot of period of time and a lot of borrowed favors, and I did it in a very unique way where I was able to pull it off over time. And of course, doing a comedy horror helps, right? So if because of the time frame and there's maybe continuity issues or challenges in trying to stay the same way over a period of years versus just 2 weeks or a month, which is a more reasonable production scheduled time, you can bake that into the episode. Like, so I do it as a scene early on in Hell's Kitty where I look and I'm like, and I grew a beard, and I'm talking about the supernatural thing that just happened, but that allows me to break that rule. So if I miss or I don't stay consistent or something changes, now anything's kind of possible with the magic of what this demon is that's possessing. So I work that into the concept, right? So it's true to its own world. That being said, the short answer is I've done the productions both myself and I've invested some of my own resources, but one was more of a traditional investor finance project. The other was one where I was the investor.
Okay. And it sounds like you're also musicians. So have you spent your entire adult life in the arts, or did you have more of a corporate job?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. It kind of really goes back to the corporate zombie survival. So I have spent my whole life in the arts. I've been involved with doing music and writing since I was young. I found some early successes. My first publication was when I was like 24, I think, and I won an award for a play I wrote, an absurdist piece, very Eugene Ionesco, called "The Nun, the Bum, and the Gun," which did quite well. And then I was working for ESPN and worked my way up to being an associate director for them when I was 26. So I was involved with production even at 18 for PBS as an intern while going to college, and so I have been in this game for a long time, one way or another. Film has been the way to marry my love of music with my love of writing into one medium. That's why I kind of found my way in there. Every one of my movie projects has my own original music to it too. Not all of it. I work with other people too, but it has some of my music. And I work with sometimes the composers to kind of tell the stories and work on those. I did a musical and I collaborated with a few composers on the musical version of that, which actually had a performance at Hollywood Fringe Fest right before the pandemic. And I think it was 2019. And so, yes, the short answer is I've been involved in the arts from the beginning. That being said, I have had one foot in the corporate world for quite a long time. When I left ESPN, I started taking programming courses and I started learning about IT because I was just seeing how much money people were making in that arena. And I was boggled by it and interested. And then I was able to kind of get involved in that early on and finance my film career and buy equipment and continue my production company, but being in IT and in training and things. And so I've had one foot in that and one foot in the creative world. I think if I were to condense the amount of time that I made money purely on my creative ideas, where I didn't have to take any other jobs, maybe 3.5 years. Most of the time I'm going back and forth. And I would consider the creative money that I make more whipped cream on the ice cream, right? And I've sustained myself through these, what you might call day jobs, but they're more contractual.
Right.
But with these contracts, I have learned so much, and I'm using creative skills.
Mhm.
I am putting together training videos. I am using my ability to kind of put different pieces of information together on different planes that most people wouldn't see the connection and
Right.
make connections. And so I feel like we live in a culture now who puts creatives in this little bubble, and they do it themselves too. Like they're too good for the corporate world. And if you actually work for it, you failed as an artist. When one of my favorite writers is Franz Kafka. And the only reason why he was that good is because he worked in the trenches of the corporate world and he wrote about it. And he was able to speak to the everyman about, or an every woman, about that experience, right? And then use such a creative imagination to metamorphosize that literally and figuratively, in his
Literally,
art.
yes.
So I think I feel that should be spoken about more, because I think it's a disservice to creatives to think they completely failed by having to take those jobs. And I think it's a disservice to our community for them to not use their creative skills to do those jobs. And I think it's a disservice for the corporate zombies in positions of power who are not paying these creatives to do these jobs in the corporate world, because what they have to contribute is more important now than ever. So.
Right. Well, and I find that very, you're correct, that when we work out in the world doing something other than sitting in our ivory tower and writing, we're learning the things that we're writing about. So my books, for instance, focus on a musician in the orchestral world. Well, how do I know that? Because I did it. My current book, it's a memoir, but it'll probably find its way into fiction too, is about moving from suburban life to farm life and discovering things like these cute little bunny rabbits don't just want to be cuddled. They want to scratch your hand off. Or, I had this vision that we're going to have cheese made from our sheep's milk. And I thought, well, I've seen all the movies. The sheep just go and you just milk them. Well, I very quickly found out it doesn't work like that. You have to figure out how to lure them to get up on the milking stand, and you have to be ready for them to object to having their head closed and the things. So, there are all these things I'm learning because I taught in schools. That's something I know. Whereas if you just want to, as you say, put yourself in a bubble, there's so much you're never going to really know or experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, and as artists, that's, to me, our concept of art is very limited. It used to be, well, you're a writer, you're an artist, you're a painter, you're an artist, you're a photographer, you're an artist. It expanded to that technology, allowed that in. Then graphic designer kind of became sort of an artist, but it's still a trade, kind of, because you make money doing that. Is that why? I don't know. And unless you make a lot of money doing art, you're not a true, the whole thing is just, can be very elitist, very discouraging, and sad. And then there's a business reality to when you choose to be a professional artist that also kind of steals away the beauty of the art on some level too. Like if you think your ability to get people to pay money for what you have is the only way it's valued, well, that's a fair point, right? If people are willing to spend the money, they really value it, right? They're going to spend money. I get that. But when creatives start to look at that as the only way in which they're valuable, well, look, then they're not going to push the envelope and maybe do something that disgusts people or makes them question their own choices in life, which might actually leave a little imprint on them, might actually leave a kernel of thought, might actually find someone else that is inspired by that changes something.
Right.
But they're not going to make a lot of money doing that.
Right. And that goes back to what you said about traditional publishers, that if you're writing something unique and creative, you may never find a traditional publisher, but that's exactly what we might need. So I did need to ask, what do you play as a musician?
I play guitar and I play bass and I play percussion as well. So
okay, you would love the room up over our garage. It's like the full width of the house, front to back. One half is my office with all my books on medieval history and so on. The other half is my husband's drum set, his dozen guitars, his keyboards. Nice. He's those are his instruments. I play more of the wind instruments, but you would like our house. We have 2 grand pianos, and one is tuned traditionally, like what today's tuning. The other is actually tuned Baroque. So Baroque tuning. So
Oh yeah.
he goes back and forth depending if he wants to play Elton John, he goes and plays on my piano. If he wants to play Bach, he goes and plays on his piano. And then if he ever has spare time, he goes up over the garage and plays all his guitars. And I think he's got, I forget if it's, I think it's a mandolin he has, or a banjo. It might be a banjo. Plays his keyboards, all of that. Composes
Sounds like a great
music.
time.
He's, I found that creative types tend to be good at many things. You do film and writing and filmmaking and, various genres of books. And he's similar. He does all his quantum scientific work, and then he goes and plays piano and guitar and drums, and he's good at all of them. So it is fun to listen to. I wanted to talk to you about the interviews you've done. Was that for ESPN?
Which interviews?
You had mentioned specifically Ray Bradbury, but I think some other pretty prominent people too.
Oh yeah, I've done interviews with most of it's for documentaries or projects where I was hired to interview people. If I did a project for Comic-Con and they were at Comic-Con, catching them there and doing something. So a lot of those interviews are through my production company. I either work for hire or part of a documentary or some kind of a project that I was doing. I've also been a journalist for years. So I worked for Moving Pictures Magazine. I did some work for People Magazine. I've done some work for 944 Magazine. Two of the 3 which are now defunct, I believe. But I've been a journalist and I've interviewed folks through that too as well.
Okay. And tell me about Ray Bradbury. What was he like?
Yeah, it's interesting because the Ray Bradbury, I met him only a long time ago, and I think it was I don't remember actually interviewing him personally, so I don't know how that got mixed into the mix. Yeah,
I might have been reading late at night and conflated 2 sentences.
Yeah,
it wouldn't be the first time.
There is a connection, though. I mean, I've been at the library where Ray Bradbury was supposedly got started, and I think they did a screening at the Ray Bradbury Museum, that kind of thing. So maybe that was the conflation there. Also, I've been a part of like groups of sci-fi communities that are part of the Ray Bradbury sci-fi. There is though, and I'm going to space out right now. Terry, the famous, he did a lot of work in science fiction. He did a lot of the special effects for Sinbad the Sailor. Special effects artist. Let me see now with Google, you can do everything. You don't need to have a memory.
Right.
I'm sorry. Ray Harryhausen. There we go. So I did interview personally Ray Harryhausen. This was at Comic-Con years ago. I remember his stunning blue eyes. So maybe somehow too that got mixed in, and he was a wonderful person because he talked about imagination, and I think he talked about his wife and how their relationship, how close they were, and how she respected his art. And I know you mentioned your husband, and there was such a beauty in that I remember the support he got from her, and I feel like when you have that, you're creating for that person too. They're like your first audience. So yeah.
So what is next for you?
What is next for me? Well, I'm continually adding to the blog, Corporate Zombie Survival. I have a comic book called Hillbillies versus Alien Chickens, which is a sci-fi comedy, very much in the vein of Mars Attacks, if you remember that. That's being published by
don't actually.
Okay, all right. It's
I
a good
have
one
to
to
laugh
see.
though. Hillbillies versus Alien Chickens. We had a very interesting chicken story here. We had predators, and then one of them got scratched, so the others pecked at her. It ended up with this poor chicken, she was pecking at herself, and I don't know how she kept living, but she was losing more and more feathers, and it ended up with her living in our front yard instead of in the chicken coop. And I thought a hawk would take her, like why leave her to suffer? Because I was trying to take care of her and heal this wound, and she just kept pecking at herself. And
Wow.
we ended up thinking we're going to have this one day skeletal chicken still wandering around. And so, obviously we're the hillbillies since we live in Appalachia. So that sort of sounded like it could be the story of my life last month.
Well, I'm gonna have to have you as a subject matter expert. Maybe when it hits the movie, becomes a movie, we'll be able to
Right.
get out that
I'll know
way.
all about being a hillbilly and having this weird alien chicken. So anyway, going on with what's next for you.
Yeah, so that's one that's in development, and hopefully it'll become a video game and a mobile app. And
Oh,
Amp
wow.
Comics put out an ash can for that, and it was the winner of a screenwriting competition. So I'm very excited by that property. I hope it gets built out soon.
I have to ask you, I meant to ask you earlier, how do you manage your time? How do you balance a job with producing so much?
Yeah, well, a lot of it is because I'm always producing. And so over time, I have a backlog of things that have been developed that are just kind of get shelved, so to speak, right? And I'm continuing to produce moving forward. But through years of doing that, to actually get something to market or get something out is so much effort that it's the tip of the iceberg that actually sees the light of day. So in the meantime, there's a backlog of things. So maybe one or two of my projects sees the light of day a year, and that's what I try to do, whether it be a book or a movie or something. And meanwhile, the next one's already in queue for the next year, and the next one's in queue for the next year. So I'm not actually doing them all simultaneously. It's the momentum I've had from being creative, I've done it. And I think that often is the case with a lot of creatives that are lifetime creatives. We've been working on this stuff for a long time. That's why I always laugh when people say, he came out of nowhere, she came out of nowhere, and all of a sudden it has 20 things. No, they just got access that year. And now everyone's asking for what else they have. And now they got that backlog.
Yep. Yeah. Well, and that's what's going to happen with me, that the last 2 years, well, the last 4 really, there's been a lot of upheaval, but the last 2, we made a cross-country move. I had surgeries. We've been learning how to take care of sheep. In the meantime, I've got probably at least 8 or 9 works in progress. So I haven't really put anything out in probably at least 2 years. But all of a sudden, there are going to be about 7 or 8 things coming out, just boom, 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 like that, because they're all in progress. So
it's in the queue. Yeah.
Is there any accomplishment or thing in your life that I have missed?
Well, I do have a collector's edition of a sci-fi graphic novel that I wrote called E-Junkie, and that should be available within the next couple of weeks. It may even be available for pre-order right now on Amazon. I'm not sure. It's days out. And that is something that's already been published by Scout Comics, and as an issue and also a graphic novel. But this collector's edition there'll be a hardcover version, and it will have everything. All the alternative artists. So in comic books, you can put different covers on books, and it has its own kind of vibe. And so it has all of that in there in their bios. And it's the original cover that the artist that did all the interiors did, right? So that book is coming out really soon, and I'm very excited by it. So because that also represents a world that I feel is a future that we're going to see. It's a bit dystopian, but it's so telling of where we're going in terms of.
And so what is it about exactly?
Well, E-Junkie stands for experience junkie. And it's set in a world in which people have regulated away pain and suffering through the use of emo-regs, or emotional regulation devices. And these devices also can kind of create a transparency through colors on they have this eye visor, and the colors of the visor reflect how you're feeling. So people know if you're feeling a little upset or agitated or nervous, and it tries to kick in through the suits people wear endorphins or dopamine hits, or serotonin. It balances all the hormones out so that you can be in a state of calm for the most part. The visors also eliminate anything that triggered that feeling of nervousness or anxiety, and it can recreate what you see in the world, right? So you cut your hand, maybe it moves the blood away because that created anxiety. And so it's a very coddled sort of world in which people live in pretty status quo. They've really regulated away most of their pain and suffering. But as such, they have to actually take away and create some suffering to create the feeling of wanting to mate, for example. So people aren't even taking the effort to go mate. Even to work is like a big deal. So in order to replace work, that when you see someone's suit with your eyes, it tracks that they saw your suit. They advertise on the outfits people wear. You have like what you call mood apparel, and then the eyeballs from someone will go deposit bit into your bank account, right? So everyone's become like a moving billboard too. And in this world, there's a group called the Guardians of Pain who feel like suffering is part of the human experience and we needed to evolve, that we're just kind of there. And they have curated the most painful moments in human history through the DNA scraping of cells of corpses, and they're selling it to the world on the black market as this new drug. And it's starting a revolution. People are mad that they've lost this history of pain, that they feel like they've been kind of indoctrinated in this blasé kind of culture of just homeostasis, maintaining just peace. And again, that goes back to our initial conversation, how people want conflict. They want their level of suffering, that's where wisdom comes from. That's where growth comes from. And yet all of our efforts to move away from pain and suffering, we've numbed our existence to the point where we've become like zombies. And I think that's why people are attracted to the zombie on a certain level too. That's why zombie movies are ever popular, is because they don't feel pain. They do want to eat, but they don't necessarily have pain. They can like cut their arm off and they don't feel that pain, right? So I think they live forever, which is the biggest fear we all have, is death. And so in this fear of death, and to try to avoid it with anything we take, from medicines or this or whatever, however we do with our world, in this fear of pain, which we anesthetize ourselves through entertainment or this or that, whatever we do in the world, buying this, buying that, we have become like zombies. We've become a zombified culture. And so there's a real parallel between the corporate zombie survival and my warning to the universe and this dystopian end, which I think we're going towards in E-Junkie. And I hope people that read my work see that and see it reflected in our culture, and maybe we can find a way to do better.
Right. There is, that ties to a couple things. I'm sure you know this saying, good times make soft men make hard times make strong men, or weak men, not soft, either one. But there's also historically, I believe it's about an 87-year cycle where we just keep going from hard times to people working hard to improve, to good times, to people, exactly as the saying goes. And so it sounds like your novel is speaking to that.
Yeah, I do think human beings tend to, we have short lives. So, and we tend to forget easily what we've learned.
Yes.
And we, more now than ever, are so involved in the immediate now and the gratification from the now, that we're losing a sense of history. I mean, it's all out there. The internet has preserved a lot of our history, but do people look for it? That goes back to the whole conversation. When you've made intelligence super ubiquitous and available, do people, if they haven't had to suffer to find it, that kernel of truth, will they recognize it? Will they use it? Will they learn from it?
Exactly. Where can people find you online?
CorporateZombieSurvival.com. I would encourage everyone to go there. There's a contact form that will get to me. You can sign up for my free newsletter. And most of my social media links are there. If you search for my name, Nicholas Tana, you can find me online as well. I'm on most of the social media, Instagram, Facebook. Yeah.
Great. So you can find me at booksandbrews.net. You can find my books at lauravosica.com. You can find our sponsor at gabrielshornpress.com. And you can find pictures of my Monty Python rabbits. Actually, the one who did that is no longer with us. But you can find the rest of them who look just like her, except they're not growling, at glenmerrillfarms.wordpress.com. And you'll also find our dogs, our chickens, and our sheep there. And if I'm motivated, I might even take pictures of the toad living in the bucket out there, just as the other animals living here. So what we have coming up on Books and Brews Light is Sherry Miter with The Ambitious Woman's Guide to Finding Fulfillment, Freedom, Impact, and Joy. That's on Books and Brews Light. On our full podcast, we have just released our interview with Ashley Fontaine and Andrea Ems on their psychological and somewhat paranormal, very paranormal thriller, Eternal Beauty. They were a lot of fun to talk to, so I highly encourage people to check in with them. And next on Books and Brews, the full podcast, we have Jake Needham, who has produced, I think, around 20 or 30 thrillers. And he is coming to us from Bangkok. So that's going to be a late night for us and an early morning for him. And we are looking for authors of Christmas or winter themed stories for December interviews. And we are also looking for an author of medieval fiction who either lives near Knoxville or can travel to Knoxville. We have a really neat place to film an interview on medieval fiction. And so this has been Books and Brews Light number 54. Thank you for being my guest. Cheers.